If you close your eyes and picture the founding fathers right now,
Mhm.
especially the guy on the $1 bill, you probably imagine this figure carved entirely out of marble.
Right.
Like we picture him standing stoically at the prow of a boat crossing the Delaware or, gazing off into the distance with this unflinching aura of greatness. We really like our national architecture to be built on a foundation of unshakable virtue.
We do. It is incredibly comforting to view history that way.
Yeah.
But the reality is that to build that architecture,
Yeah.
the actual foundation had to be dug out of the mud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when you step away from the mythology and actually open up the primary sources from the colonial frontier,
Right.
and I mean reading the actual physical documents from his youth,
Hmm.
that pristine marble image, it shatters almost instantly.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. Today's deep dive is a complete historical reality check.
Absolutely.
We are stripping away centuries of hagiography and looking strictly at a very specific window of time, 1732 to 1758.
From his birth to his resignation from the Virginia militia.
Exactly. We're pulling directly from his personal financial diaries, specifically a document known as Ledger A,
Which is fascinating.
along with first-hand military accounts, his letters to his mother, and the actual surrender documents he signed in the wilderness. Our mission is to introduce you to a young man who was ruthlessly ambitious, deeply insecure, and highly flawed. We are looking at the Bloody Apprentice.
It is arguably the most vital period to examine.
Yeah.
Because if you want to understand the stoic patriarch of the 1790s,
Yeah.
you cannot start there.
No.
You have to dissect the raw, aggressive, imperialistic, young provincial officer who was forged in a crucible of severe ethical compromises and catastrophic military blunders.
Okay, let's unpack this because if we want to understand the mechanics of how this young man became so desperate to achieve elite status, we have to look at his starting position on the board.
Right.
He wasn't born at the absolute pinnacle of the Virginia aristocracy, was he?
Far from it. No, he was born into what we might classify as the second tier of the Virginia gentry.
Okay.
And his early psychological development is defined by a profound consciousness of his own social marginality. When he was just 11 years old, his father, Augustine, died.
Wow. 11.
Yeah, and according to the inheritance customs of the time, the vast bulk of the family estate, so the best land, the most resources.
All the money-making stuff.
Exactly. It all passed to the older half-brothers from Augustine's first marriage.
Oh, I see.
The primary beneficiary was his older half-brother, Lawrence, who inherited the estate that would later be known as Mount Vernon.
I want to pause there to understand the practical impact of that. An 11-year-old realizes he is getting the leftovers.
Yeah.
In a society where your land and your wealth dictate your entire identity, how does that restrict his future?
It restricts him most severely in his education.
Really?
Yeah, in colonial Virginia, if you were in the uppermost echelons of the elite, you didn't just go to a local school. You were sent across the Atlantic to be educated in Europe.
Oh, of course.
You received classical training, you learned Latin, you networked with British aristocrats.
Right.
But because of his father's death and the division of the estate, he simply lacked the financial means to do that. He was marooned in Virginia.
So he is essentially a teenager on the outside looking in,
Yes.
realizing he doesn't have the pedigree or the European polish of the guys he wants to be peers with. How does he compensate for that?
He compensates by aggressively faking it.
Faking it.
He had to absorb the superficial markers of high status on his own.
Wow.
One of the primary sources we have from his teenage years is his copybook, where he meticulously transcribed an English manual called The Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior.
Well, he just copied down an etiquette book.
Hand-copied over 100 maxims about how to speak, how to sit, how to address superiors.
It's just incredible.
It was essentially a behavioral blueprint to mask his provincial insecurities.
Like studying how to hold your fork so people think you're rich.
Exactly that.
But good posture doesn't buy you an estate.
It doesn't.
At some point, he needs actual capital. I know he leverages his older half-brother Lawrence Lars's marriage to get his foot in the door, but I'm trying to understand the mechanics of how a teenager actually starts amassing wealth.
Right.
Lawrence marries into the Fairfax family, who are massive power brokers.
Calling the Fairfax's power brokers almost undersells it. They controlled something called the Northern Neck Proprietary.
What exactly is a proprietary?
It was a massive feudal-style land grant from the British Crown.
Okay.
The Fairfax family literally owned the rights to roughly 5 million acres of land in northern Virginia.
5 million acres. That is incomprehensible.
It's basically a small country. They lived at a palatial estate called Belvoir.
Right.
So the teenage George starts spending time there, currying favor with William Fairfax and Lord Thomas Fairfax. And by the time he is 16 in 1748, he secures a job working for them as a land surveyor.
Now, when I hear land surveyor, I think of a guy in a high-vis vest on the side of the highway measuring property lines.
Right, exactly.
But in the 18th century, this was a much bigger deal. Why was this specific job so lucrative for a teenager?
Because it wasn't just about drawing lines on a map, it was about information asymmetry.
Oh,
A surveyor on the frontier was the very first person to see the virgin land.
right. They're out there first.
They knew where the best river valleys were, where the most fertile soil was located, and where the natural trade routes would form. Furthermore, surveyors were often paid in land, or they could use their insider knowledge to legally register the absolute best tracts of wilderness for themselves before anyone else even knew the land existed.
It's like being the guy who gets hired to draw the zoning maps for a rapidly expanding city,
Yes.
and using that advanced knowledge to quietly buy up all the cheap commercial lots before the public finds out where the new highway is going to be built.
That is a perfect mechanical analogy. He was ruthless at utilizing this advantage.
Yeah.
He was so effective that by age 17 in 1749, his Fairfax connections helped him secure an official commission from the College of William and Mary as the surveyor of the newly formed Culpeper County.
A teenager.
A teenager. By the time he was 19, this teenager had amassed thousands of acres of frontier land holdings that rivaled what his older brother had inherited.
That is incredible. But even with the land, he still has this desperate need to be seen as elite.
Oh, absolutely.
And you can see this in his absolute obsession with his wardrobe. It borders on extreme vanity.
It was staggering, but we have to contextualize it. Colonial Virginia was a highly stratified, visually coded society.
Okay.
The aesthetics of gentility were the currency of power.
Meaning if you don't look the part.
If you didn't look like a British gentleman, you weren't treated like one.
Right.
We have his order forms sent to his English agents, where he specifically demands that his bespoke goods from London be fashionable, neat, and good.
What are we actually talking about here? What is a teenage frontier surveyor ordering from London?
We were talking about ruffled shirts, a riding waistcoat made of superfine scarlet cloth trimmed with gold lace, and a fashionable gold-laced hat.
Wow.
In 1754, when he was serving as a militia officer, he specifically ordered a superfine blue broadcloth coat with silver trimmings.
He wants to look sharp.
Very sharp. And it wasn't just clothing. He ordered ornamental, silver-hilted small swords from London cutlers.
Silver-hilted small swords.
Right. These weren't practical military weapons for fighting in the woods. They were overt, highly expensive symbols of aristocratic status.
It's as the 18th century equivalent of maxing out your credit cards to buy a bespoke Italian suit and a luxury watch just to convince the board of directors you belong in the VIP room.
Exactly.
And he gets a real taste of what that actual high society looks like when he takes a trip to Barbados in 1751, right?
Yes, he does.
He's 19, his brother Lawrence has tuberculosis, and they go to the Caribbean for Lawrence's health.
Exactly. And that trip is pivotal. Barbados was the crown jewel of the British Caribbean. It was incredibly cosmopolitan, incredibly wealthy, and crawling with elite British regular army officers and wealthy sugar planters.
So it's a huge step up from the Virginia woods.
Massive.
Yeah.
He is immediately exposed to this vibrant high society culture. He immediately ditches his heavy provincial Virginia wool clothes for breathable linens and vibrant silks.
Oh, wow.
He is desperately signaling his desire to assimilate into the broader imperial British aristocracy.
But this kind of signaling is wildly expensive.
Very.
And this is where his personal financial diary, Ledger A, completely fractures the puritanical image we have of him, because his account books show he is spending a shocking amount of time and money at the gambling tables.
Ledger A tracks significant amounts of cash won and lost at cards, whist, billiards, and horse races throughout the 1750s.
I have to ask, why is a guy who is so notoriously insecure about his financial standing risking his capital on a card game? Was it just an addiction?
What's fascinating here is the social mechanism behind the vice. In the 18th century, Chesapeake gambling wasn't viewed simply as a weekend indulgence or a moral failing.
What was it?
In the taverns of Williamsburg and the drawing rooms of estates like Belvoir, gambling was a highly performative act of gentility. It was a mechanism through which young elite men established social dominance.
How does losing money establish dominance?
Thus, by demonstrating financial courage
Ah.
and signaling that you have the credit and the nerve to sustain a loss without flinching.
Oh, I see.
It was a way to forge political alliances and test the mettle of your peers. The risk tolerance that he was cultivating right there at the card table, proving he belonged in the oligarchy, directly mirrored the strategic high-stakes gambles he was about to take on the military frontier.
Let's follow that thread because we have to see what happens when this highly leveraged, status-obsessed, fake-it-till-you-make-it young man tries to translate all of this fabricated gentility into actual political power.
Right.
He tries to enter local politics. And his first attempt is a spectacular failure, isn't it?
It is an unmitigated disaster. In 1755, at the age of 23, he ran for a seat in the Virginia House of Burgesses representing Frederick County.
Okay.
He operated under this pure, arrogant assumption that his newly acquired status as a military officer and a massive landowner meant the voters would naturally defer to him.
He just thought they'd bow down.
Exactly. He didn't campaign. He didn't engage in retail politics.
And voting back then was a completely different mechanical process than what we do today.
Very true.
It wasn't a secret ballot behind a curtain.
Right. It was a system called Viva Voce,
Wait.
which translates to with living voice.
Wow.
You didn't check a box.
Yeah.
On election day, you walked up to a table in a public forum, usually the county courthouse, in front of the sheriff, the candidates who were sitting right there, and a massive crowd of your neighbors,
No pressure.
and you loudly declared who you were voting for.
So the candidates are literally staring at you as you vote. And under those intense public conditions, how did our future first president do?
He was publicly humiliated.
Wow.
Out of hundreds of votes cast, he received exactly 40.
40 votes.
He finished a very distant third, behind two other men who secured around 270 votes each.
Here's where it gets really interesting because he retreats, he analyzes his failure, and he comes back 3 years later in 1758 to run for the exact same seat.
He does.
And this time, he isn't relying on his posture or his silver-hilted sword. He brings a campaign manager, Colonel James Wood, and they employ a strategy known colloquially as swilling the planters with bumbo.
What are we talking about here?
Here, talking about the systematic, massive distribution of alcohol to the electorate.
Right.
Washington learned a very cynical lesson from his first defeat. Aristocratic entitlement doesn't win elections.
No.
Capital employment and public spectacle do.
Can you break down the actual data on what he purchased for this election?
Yeah.
Because reading the ledger is mind-blowing.
The records show that for an electorate of roughly 391 eligible voters, Washington financed the following: 46 gallons of beer, 40 gallons of rum punch,
Wow.
plus an extra hogshead a barrel, and 10 bowls of it,
Good grief.
35 gallons of wine, 2 gallons of hard cider, and 3.5 pints of brandy. Wait, he literally bought an election by getting the entire county blackout drunk. I mean, I need to do the math on that. That is well over 160 gallons of hard liquor for a voting pool of less than 400 guys.
He absolutely did.
That's
Insane.
And we should point out the legal and moral flexibility he demonstrated here. There's a 1699 Virginia General Assembly law that explicitly banned candidates from providing meat and drink to influence voters.
so it was highly illegal.
Technically, yes. But practically treating the voters had become an expected cultural norm.
Everybody was doing it.
It was a loophole that everyone knew about, but Washington exploited it with industrial efficiency.
Right, he scaled it up.
He essentially ensured that the entire voting populace was severely intoxicated by the time they walked up to the sheriff to declare their votes out loud.
And the result.
He secured 310 votes and crushed his rivals. It was a massive victory. It permanently shaped his political pragmatism.
Mhm.
He realized that democratic systems, or at least the legislative systems of his day,
Mhm.
are highly susceptible to whoever is willing to spend the most capital to engineer the desired outcome.
Okay, so he figures out how to manipulate local politics by taking a calculated, slightly questionable risk.
Right.
But taking risks at a Virginia courthouse is one thing. When he takes that exact same risk-taking mentality out into the wilderness, it leads to an absolute geopolitical catastrophe.
Yes, it does.
We have to talk about what happened at Jumonville Glen in 1754.
This is a foundational moment in global history, and Washington is right at the center of it.
Okay.
He is 22 years old. He is sent by the Virginia governor Robert Dinwiddie into the contested Ohio River Valley.
And this is disputed territory.
Deeply disputed. The British, specifically wealthy Virginian land speculators in the Ohio Company, are claiming this territory. But the French are already there building forts. Dinwiddie gives Washington aggressive orders to confront the French and capture or kill any forces obstructing British settlements.
I want to clarify something. Dinwiddie is giving these aggressive military orders, essentially authorizing acts of war without the knowledge or approval of the king back in London, right?
Correct. It was a rogue provincial operation driven by local economic interests.
Wow.
And Washington isn't marching into the woods alone. He is allied with an incredibly shrewd Ohio Iroquois leader named Tennecarrison, known to the British as the Half-King.
Why does Washington need Tennecarrison?
Because Washington doesn't know the terrain and he doesn't fully grasp the complex indigenous politics of the region
He's out of his depth.
completely. He relies on Tennecarrison for intelligence.
Yeah.
But what Washington doesn't realize is that Tennecarrison has his own aggressive geopolitical agenda.
Oh, okay.
He has lost influence among the regional tribes who are siding with the French, and he desperately wants to manipulate the British into fighting his regional enemies to restore his own power base.
So a 22-year-old ambitious surveyor is being used as a pawn by a seasoned indigenous diplomat.
Essentially, yes.
How does the actual skirmish unfold?
On May 28, 1754, Tennecarson's scouts locate a small French encampment hiding in a rocky ravine.
Okay.
Washington's horse, guided by Tennecarson, surrounds them and ambushes them. It is a chaotic 15-minute firefight. About 10 French soldiers are killed, including their commander, Ensign Joseph Coulon de Villiers, Sieur de Jumonville.
But the French survivors are screaming that this isn't a military camp.
Yes.
They are claiming they were on a diplomatic mission and that Jumonville was literally trying to read a diplomatic summons demanding the British withdraw when Washington's men open fire.
The confusion is absolute, and it culminates in a truly gruesome moment that fundamentally alters world history.
Oh, man.
During the aftermath of the firefight, Tennecarson approaches the wounded French commander, Jumonville.
Okay.
According to eyewitness accounts, Tennecarson says in French, "Thou art not yet dead, my father."
Oh.
He then cleaves Jumonville's skull open. With a tomahawk, reaches into the wound and literally washes his hands in the man's brains.
Good Lord. You would think that participating in the slaughter of an ambassador of a rival European superpower during peacetime, no less, would severely freak a 22-year-old out.
You would think so.
He has just committed an act of war. But Washington's reaction is the complete opposite. He is practically intoxicated by the adrenaline.
He writes a letter to his brother bragging about the engagement. He famously writes, "I heard the bullets whistle, and believe me, there is something charming in the sound."
That letter ends up getting published right. It makes its way all the way to London.
It does, and it reaches King George II.
Oh, no.
And the king openly mocked Washington's callow bravado. The king supposedly retorted, he would not say so if he had been used to hear many.
Wow, shut down by the king.
Right. Washington's vanity and his desire for glory completely blinded him to the fact that his inability to control his allies or verify his targets had effectively sparked the French and Indian War.
Which became a global conflict.
Exactly. A conflict that rapidly metastasized into the global 7 Years' War.
He accidentally started a world war because he wanted to play soldier.
Yeah.
And the tactical decisions he makes immediately after this just compound the disaster. He retreats and decides to build a fort to defend against the inevitable French counterattack.
Right.
He calls it Fort Necessity. But from an engineering standpoint, this was a joke.
Right. It was strategically suicidal.
Really?
He built a hasty circular wooden palisade in an alpine clearing known as the Great Meadows. But he built it in a geographic depression, essentially a bowl in the landscape.
Oh, no.
And he placed it much too close to the surrounding tree line.
So the enemy can just hide in the trees above you, look down into your bowl, and shoot directly into your fort.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what a massive force of French regulars and native allies do a month later.
Yes.
And they happen to be commanded by Jumonville's vengeful half-brother.
To make matters worse, as the French attack from the high ground, a torrential rainstorm hits. Because the fort is in a depression, it completely floods. The defensive trenches fill with mud. The Virginians' gunpowder is ruined, and Washington's men lose all discipline.
They just break down.
They actually break into the camp's liquor supply and get hopelessly drunk while taking mass casualties.
Wow.
Washington is entirely trapped and has no choice but to surrender.
The surrender itself is where we really see his character tested under pressure. It's pouring rain, it's ashen dark, and the French send over a surrender document. Washington doesn't speak French.
Not a word.
So he sends a subordinate, Captain Jacob Van Bram, who speaks some rudimentary French out into the mud to translate it.
The French draft this document, and it contains a devastating geopolitical trap. The document requires the British to officially acknowledge the assassination of Jumonville.
I want to clarify the legal weight of that word. Why does it matter if they call it an assassination versus a casualty of war?
Because assassination provides a casus belli, the legal and moral justification for a sovereign nation to declare war. The French desperately needed Great Britain to admit on paper that they murdered a diplomat, which would frame the British as the aggressors on the world stage.
Got it.
Van Braam, reading this wet-smeared document by candlelight in the pouring rain, allegedly mistranslates the French word l'assassinat to Washington merely as death or loss.
So Washington signs it.
He signs it.
He formally confesses to murder. When he finally realizes what he signed, how does he handle the fallout? Does he take responsibility as the commanding officer?
He ruthlessly deflects the blame. He throws Van Braam entirely under the bus.
Seriously.
In order to secure the safe retreat of the rest of his men, Washington actually hands Van Braam over to the French as a hostage. Van Braam ends up rotting in a Montreal prison for years.
Wait, he literally gave the guy who made a translation error to the enemy as a hostage and then blamed him for the entire diplomatic crisis. It's like a junior middle manager accidentally initiating a hostile corporate takeover, botching the legal paperwork, and then throwing his unpaid intern under the bus to save his own job.
That's a great way to put it. And this raises an important question regarding Washington's moral leadership at this time.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Because years later, when Van Braam was finally released and faced charges of treason for that translation, Washington never publicly cleared the man's name.
Oh, man.
He never admitted his own fault for authorizing the signature. He was so obsessed with his own legacy and his pursuit of a royal commission that he was perfectly willing to sacrifice a subordinate to protect his carefully cultivated image.
That is wild. And his relationship with his Native American allies during all of this was just as arrogant. He needed Tenacrison's intelligence to survive, but how did he actually treat him?
The relationship was defined by transactional utility and profound condescension.
Wow.
Washington heavily relied on Tenacrison, but treating him with total imperial arrogance. He expected subservience.
Which didn't go over well, I imagine.
No, Tenacrison eventually abandoned him before the surrender at Fort Necessity, and later left a scathing assessment. He called Washington a good-natured man, but had no experience explicitly noting that Washington took upon him to command the Indians as his slaves.
Because to Washington, the frontier wasn't sovereign indigenous territory.
No.
It was just a repository of wealth waiting to be claimed. He viewed these military expeditions essentially as armed real estate ventures.
And to fund those ventures, to pay for the bespoke London tailoring the 160 gallons of rum for the elections, the rampant land speculation Washington required a massive continuous economic engine.
Which brings us to the darkest part of this foundation. That economic engine was built entirely on brutality.
It was. When we analyze the young Washington's views on slavery, we are looking at a man who operated flawlessly and without hesitation within the brutal mechanics of the Virginia slave economy.
Right.
There was absolutely zero documentary evidence from the 1750s to suggest he harbored any moral qualms about enslaving human beings.
We know he inherited wealth early on. At age 11 in 1743, he inherited 10 enslaved people from his father's estate.
Yes.
And we have their names recorded in the primary sources. Fortune, George Longjoe, Winna Bellendar, Jenny Adam Nat London, and Millie.
Right.
But I'm trying to understand the actual business model here. How did the plantation economy practically function to fund his lifestyle?
The colonial Virginia economy was based on tobacco, which is incredibly labor-intensive and notoriously volatile in price.
Okay.
The entire system operated on massive amounts of credit extended by British merchants. Planters were almost always in debt.
Really always in debt?
Almost always. To secure more credit to buy more land or luxury goods, they needed collateral. And in this brutal system, enslaved human beings were the most liquid, reliable form of capital asset.
So they weren't just a labor force, they were literally the financial leverage used to expand the business.
Exactly. And as Washington acquired more property through his surveying, he actively participated in the local slave market to provide the labor force to extract agricultural value from his lands. If you look at Ledger A, the casual commodification is stark. He logs the purchase of human lives right alongside the acquisition of livestock and farm equipment.
Just another line item.
Literally.
Yeah.
For example, in January 1755, he logs the purchase of a woman named Cleo at a sale for 50 pounds.
He is treating human beings strictly as leveraged assets to fuel his corporate expansion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cruelty wasn't just in the physical labor, it was in the absolute reduction of humanity to a balance sheet.
Yeah.
Natural birth rates among the enslaved population were viewed by Washington merely as a positive return on investment.
Wow.
He demanded rigorous labor from sunrise to sunset 6 days a week. Any resistance was viewed not as a human cry for freedom, but as a theft of his personal property.
So how did he deal with that resistance?
He punished resistance with severe physical discipline or with the ultimate threat sale to the notoriously lethal sugar colonies in the West Indies, which was effectively a death sentence.
So what does this all mean? When we look at all of this together, it completely shatters that modern, somewhat comforting defense that people always try to use, Oh, well, he's just a man of his time.
Right, exactly.
You can't say he was passively participating in this system. He was actively and aggressively driving and expanding the plantation economy to fuel his own social ascent.
He was entirely a product of the plantation oligarchy. The philosophical reflections on human liberty and the agonizing over slavery that complicate his legacy later in his life.
Yeah.
They simply do not exist in the 1750s.
So his public life during this decade is defined by cold calculation, economic brutality, and intense imperial ambition.
Very much so.
But when we look at his private life, we see these deep emotional contradictions cracking beneath that stoic armor he was trying so hard to wear.
We really do.
Especially with the women in his life. Let's look at his mother, Mary Ball Washington.
Mary Ball Washington was a formidable, fiercely controlling woman, and she placed a constant, heavy emotional and financial strain on her eldest son. The primary sources paint a picture of a mother who is deeply self-absorbed and totally unsympathetic to Washington Hearst's public obligations or his desperate desire for military glory.
I think the craziest example of this dynamic is a letter exchange from June 1755.
Oh, the dysentery letter.
Yes. Washington is deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness. He is suffering from a severe case of dysentery. He is physically miserable. He's preparing to ride into the Battle of the Monongahela under General Braddock, which ends up being a horrific slaughter.
Just absolute chaos.
It is quite literally a life-or-death situation, and he receives a letter from his mother delivered to the camp. Is she worried about his safety? No. She's complaining about her domestic inconveniences and demanding that he immediately procure her a Dutch servant and send her some butter.
It perfectly encapsulates their relationship.
It's unbelievable.
And Washington's reply is dripping with barely concealed irritation. He addresses her stiffly as honored madam and essentially has to explain, I am in the wilderness, there are no inhabitants, I cannot get you a servant, and I certainly cannot get you butter.
Just pure frustration.
He was constantly answering her calls for money while she perpetually complained to neighbors about her supposed poverty and his neglect.
It really makes you realize that his famous, icy, stoic public persona wasn't just him trying to emulate Roman Republican ideals he read in a book. It was a very real psychological defense mechanism he built against a manipulative, unyielding, and frequently embarrassing mother.
That is a very astute psychological reading. But if his mother represented the suffocating provincialism he desperately wanted to escape, there was another woman who represented the absolute pinnacle of the aristocratic sophistication he craved.
Right.
And that was Sarah Carey Fairfax, known as Sally.
Sally Fairfax, who happens to be married to his closest friend, mentor, and patron, George William Fairfax.
Right. She was wealthy, highly educated, elegantly cultured, and fiercely intelligent. And Washington's relationship with her was intense, highly flirtatious, and morally perilous.
How perilous are we talking? Because in September 1758, he is actively serving in a military campaign, and he has already formally engaged himself to Martha Custis. But he writes this agonizing, desperate letter to Sally Fairfax. It's known as the Votary to Love letter.
It is an extraordinary piece of historical evidence because it is one of the very few times we see the mask completely slip. He abandons his extreme self-control.
Wow.
He confesses his profound emotional entanglement. He writes, "'Tis true, I profess myself a votary to love.
Oh.
I acknowledge that a lady is in the case, and further I confess that this lady is known to you."
Oh, man.
He essentially declares his love for the wife of his closest friend, risking massive social scandal.
It's like he's caught between two immense conflicting gravitational pulls. On one side, he has the suffocating demands of his mother pulling him down into provincial obscurity.
Yeah.
On the other side, he has the unattainable aristocratic sophistication of his best friend's wife, who he can never truly have.
Right.
And meanwhile, he's executing this incredibly cold, calculated marriage of convenience to Martha Custis just to catapult himself into the elite because Martha is one of the wealthiest widows in Virginia.
It highlights a highly pragmatic, deeply divided view of women's agency. Elite women, like Martha and Sally, had immense soft power in colonial society.
Sure.
They were conduits for massive wealth transfer, and they served as intellectual equals or muses. Washington respected that power.
But only at the top.
Exactly. This respect for agency was strictly confined to the highest social strata. Lower-class women, and certainly enslaved women, were viewed by him purely as units of economic and biological production. He was a man of profound and sometimes dangerous contradictions.
So if we take a step back, we have painted this incredibly vivid picture of a 26-year-old George Washington in 1758.
We have.
He's aggressive, he's expansionist, he's an unapologetic imperialist. He wants a regular royal commission in the British Army more than anything in the world, and he firmly believes in projecting lethal power to protect what we call mercantilist interests.
Let's define that term for a moment. Mercantilism was the economic theory driving the British Empire.
Right.
It believed that wealth was finite, and a nation's power depended on extracting raw materials from colonies and aggressively protecting those trade monopolies with military force.
Okay.
That was his fundamental worldview at the moment he resigns from the Virginia militia in 1758. His frustration wasn't a philosophical disagreement with the British Empire. His frustration was simply that the British Empire refused to give him a seat at the adult table.
So let's do a thought experiment, because I think this is where it gets really profound.
Yeah.
Let's take the young, ambitious George Washington of 1758 and drop him into our modern world in the year 2026.
Okay, I like that.
He looks around at the United States today. He sees hundreds of forward-operating military bases across the globe. He sees unprecedented naval and aerospace hegemony. He sees a nation projecting lethal force across oceans to secure its trade routes. What does the Washington of 1758 think of all this?
This is a fascinating historical synthesis to consider, because where modern critics in 2026 might look at that massive global footprint and see dangerous imperial overreach, the Washington of 1758 would likely be awestruck.
He would be deeply fundamentally approving.
He wouldn't see it as some gross betrayal of a humble agrarian republic.
Not at all. He would view the modern American military-industrial complex as the absolute glorious perfection of the British imperial model he had so desperately wanted to join.
Wow.
Aggressive containment of global rivals, maintaining a massive standing professional army, securing international economic interests with lethal force. These concepts align perfectly with the ambitions of the young colonel who eagerly marched into the Ohio country to violently expel the French.
That is the ultimate irony. You have modern politicians constantly quoting the founders, specifically quoting Washington's later warnings against foreign entanglements to argue for isolationism.
Right, exactly.
But the primary sources tell us that if you showed the young Washington of 1758 the modern U.S. military footprint, he wouldn't be horrified. He would probably ask for the launch codes and demand a VIP tour of a nuclear aircraft carrier.
Probably.
To him, this would be the absolute triumph of the enterprise he started in the mud at Jumonville Glen. It represents the complete realization of the geopolitical dominance he fought for in the backwoods. The power he wielded as an old man was built entirely on the ruthless ambition he cultivated as a young man.
It fundamentally changes how you look at the man. We started this deep dive talking about the marble myth, the stoic, flawless guy on the dollar bill.
Yeah.
But the Bloody Apprentice of 1758 was not a saint. He was a product of a brutal, opportunistic frontier.
Indeed.
He was driven by deep social insecurities. He bought elections with massive amounts of rum. He speculated ruthlessly on land. He aggressively exploited enslaved labor. And he deflected the blame for his own staggering military incompetence.
But it was exactly that fiery crucible of vice, catastrophic failure, and imperial ambition that prepared him.
Oh, so.
If he had never failed so disastrously at Fort Necessity, he never would have learned the caution he displayed during the Revolution. His own massive, humiliating failures forced him to adapt to build that stoic, psychological defense mechanism, and eventually gave him the cold, unyielding pragmatism required to command a continent.
It makes you think if Washington's greatest asset wasn't divine marble perfection, but rather his ability to survive his own humiliating, disastrous failures and ruthlessly adapt his persona. What modern failures in our own lives, or even in our leaders, are we too quick to judge as the absolute end of a story rather than just the bloody apprenticeship of something much bigger?